Good evening and welcome to the rest of the news. Our special guest this evening is Colin Gunn, who is talking to us from Waco, Texas. And Colin has made a tremendous video on the public schools and documented a lot of surprising things that everybody needs to hear. So we're really very pleased that you're with us this evening, Colin, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about this video.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Simon, for having me on your show. The film Indoctrination, we've worked on it for about 3 years, and we just released it last October, and we're promoting it around the country right now. And it's a very enjoyable film. It's designed for a Christian audience to teach them about the concept of biblical education as opposed to public school education. I got in a yellow school bus with my family. I had 7 children at the time. I have 8 now, and we traveled around the country visiting sites in America that are relevant to the history of American education. We also talked to many whistleblowers, those that have either participated in the public school system themselves, so we interviewed teachers and school principals, but we also interviewed experts, and so we have many expert witnesses who have studied the history of education and are able to talk about why we are where we are today, because everyone knows the public schools are incredibly unsuccessful, incredibly expensive, but we're focusing particularly on the issue of they're particularly harmful spiritually, and so we look at the Christian, the effect that the public schools have had on Christians and the church. That's what we're focused on. I think you have the trailer to show.
Yes, let's just run the trailer, and that gives us a lot of important information about this.
I want to see a child in every public school in America who is trained as a witness for Jesus Christ.
When you send that child off to school today, you're sending them into a pagan society.
And the studies are showing that there's virtually no discernible difference between the church and the world. At what point is Southern Baptists going to rise up and say, enough is enough?
Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation.
We've got to do something different. The schools are failing.
I would go to 6 or 7 days a week, not just Monday through Friday.
You're not going to be painting, okay? You're going to be writing down whatever comes to your mind when you hear the word gay or when you hear the word lesbian.
So nothing's right or wrong
There's
in
no
this
right
either?
That's right.
They are stealing our children. But because they are leaving the body of the child with us, we don't even know it's happening.
If I had my way, government education would be brought to a halt.
Trying to fix public education is like trying to teach a pig how to dance. You get dirty and the pig gets mad.
Turning your children over to total strangers and having those strangers work on your child's mind, it's a mad idea.
Public schools have become a criminal enterprise.
Parents are willing to admit that there are these problems and yet believe that their children will somehow escape. They won't.
And it may have taken a school shooting to wake us up, to see the danger, but that's a very small danger compared to all the other things that go on that can destroy our children.
A teacher is in trouble for bringing a religion into his classroom, but should he lose his job?
When we go into a public school, we have to leave God at the door. It just came to the point where I couldn't do that anymore.
Jesus said, build your house upon the rock, but the foolish man refused the words of Christ, would not build their education systems on the fear of God, on the words of Christ.
Everything exists to proclaim the glory of God. And the one place where we send our kids 7 hours a day is a place where God's name can't be mentioned. It's not indoctrination, it's insanity.
Now, that was a tremendous presentation, and you've said a few things that I cannot resist commenting on, that the public school is kind of anti-Christian. Is that right?
Yes,
I mean, they take away Christian prayer, but they let you play to Buddha or the Earth Goddess or something like that. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's the public schools have, if they have religion, it will be a pluralistic form of religion. And so when we look at the history of the public schools, this is not something that's just happened in the last few years, and we can't just blame it on the Obama administration. This is something that's happened over the course of 200 years. We're actually seeing that the public school system was designed to eliminate the authority of Christ, and there were particular parties involved in the early 1800s who established this compulsory education system, particularly Horace Mann, a Unitarian who didn't hold to the Trinity and therefore didn't hold to the authority of Christ, and others like Robert Owen, who was a socialist, an atheist, and a utopian who came over to America to establish New Harmony and prototype the American public school system there. So we actually, I think, have a clip where we have one of the gentlemen in our film, Samuel Blumenfeld, who talks about the socialist agenda behind the public school system.
Well, and you said something earlier about the churches are hurting because over the last 200 years we've had an anti-church public education that sort of makes fun of the church and Christianity. Is that correct?
Yes, what we're seeing is that the state has opposed God's authority because it wants to be king. The statists want themselves to be worshipped and served, and so that's the combat in our culture right now, where we have authoritarian, anti-liberty people running the government, and lots of Americans buy into that mindset where they can't discern our liberties. And so this didn't happen in the last 20 years or 50 years. It started to happen very early on, and the mechanism behind it has been the public school system. The best way to change a culture, as the utopianists knew, was to get children away from the parents and re-educate them. The parents aren't going to change their views easily, especially when the views are radical and anti-liberty or Christian, anti-American. It's hard to persuade people on that, but if you get them when they're young enough, it's easy to persuade them that very wicked things are normal. So that's how it's happened. That's why the public schools have been used.
And the communists, the Nazis, they all start with the children to a large extent. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. So the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto is free education for all, and that was the pattern that was followed by the establishers of the American public school education system, where they did much the same, separate children away from the parents, indoctrinate them with values that were in line with the collectivist worldview, and eventually eliminate Christ and God's authority from the classroom.
Right. Well, let's run that video now on Mr. Blumenfeld.
We have a significant problem in America. We've embraced socialism, and we are far down the line. Nationalized health care, all the welfare that we have, bailing out banks, and it looks like would you say it's fair to say the public schools are an engine to that process?
Not only that, but the public schools themselves were a form of socialism. A state government education system is a socialist system. People don't realize that socialism was an ideology in this country as early as the 1820s. And it was brought to this country by Robert Owen, who believed that the cause of all of our problems was religion, and that children could be educated in such a way without religion to become anything you wanted. So he came to this country and he created the first secular communist colony in America called New Harmony, Indiana. And he thought that he could reform the universe by getting rid of religion. The best way to do that is to educate children without religion so that they would create this new communist utopia in which everybody was equal.
Now, it was like you said, there's a good indication of a socialist influence in the public schools going back some time.
That's right. The public schools are socialist to begin with. They redistribute wealth away from some parents to educate others. That's a socialist idea. But they're also purposefully there to bring in this idea of conformity, of children being owned by the state, and we see that acted out in our society. It's the first institution that children enter, and it's bizarre to me that Christians and conservatives would submit, even if they're, especially if they're conservatives, would submit their children to a government institution at the age of 5 years old. It's incredible. We cannot think of a good reason to use the public schools. And we interviewed teachers who said much the same thing. It's interesting that the group in our society that educate at home or in private schools at a higher rate, there's three groups, public school teachers, congressmen and senators, all of them home educate or private educate at a higher rate than the rest of the population. So maybe there's something they're not telling us. We're seeing this commitment, even in the Christian church, where the majority are still sending their kids to public schools. But we have whistleblowers to argue against that. We have teachers, Christian teachers in the public school, who say it's very hard, if not impossible, to be salt and light in the classroom. In fact, the conflict's so great that we see, and we give examples of some of them in our film, who came to a position, a dilemma with being a Christian in the public school system.
Yeah, you know, I'm old enough so I can remember when you could go out of your house and not even lock your door, or you could, you know, don't lock your car. You could walk through the inner city and not have any trouble, and all of that has changed, and it's changed very slowly. So people didn't realize it was changing or what was causing it to change. But we can see from what you've told us through your documentary that a lot of these changes were coming because we've gotten away from God, and it's a lot of money has gone into seeing that we're getting away from God. Is that right?
Well, money's a big issue here. So really a large motive that behind the public school system is that it takes a huge amount of money away from people. As a homeschool dad, I still have to pay my property tax here in Texas. It's one of our biggest bills of the year. And it goes to fund other people's children, people who would probably oppose at some point my worldview and the values that I would hold. And American Christians are in that position. If we look at Washington, D.C., and we look at the teachers' unions, you look at a very harmful, very self-interested group of people who are really just taking money away and squandering most of it, but using it, the worst part of it is they're using that money against the people that contribute it and opposing their ideology. So Christians are paying for this system that undermines their practices and values.
Exactly. So they tax the Christians to promote an anti-Christian worldview.
That's correct. I think you have a clip where we have one of the men from the NEA talking, and you'll see an example of how he talks about what they're doing.
Let's. This is an attorney from the NEA, and he's telling about the NEA, the teachers union, and what they're all about. So let's roll that film.
NEA and its affiliates have been singled out because they are the most effective unions in the United States. And they are the nation's leading advocates for public education and the type of liberal social and economic agenda that these groups find unacceptable.
Do you still think that the teachers' unions are fighting for the kids?
It is not because we care about children, and it is not because we have a vision of a great public school for every child. NEA and its affiliates are effective advocates because we have power.
Power and money. That's what Washington is all about. They have so much of it, but it never seems enough.
But it's also true that fixing our schools will cost some money. Recruiting and rewarding the best teachers costs money. Making it possible for families to send their kids to college costs money. Money, money, money.
You have to pay for this. So for someone to consume private education or to homeschool, they have to say, I'm going to give up on my $12,000, $13,000 a year that are paid in taxes for my kid. I'm going to give up that free education, free in that it's already paid for because you have no choice, and then I'm going to pay twice for it.
Now, tell us a little bit about the NEA, and I see President Obama was in that clip too.
Well, President Obama's talking there, he's asking for money, and the funny thing is that no money is ever satisfactory. We keep giving into this public school system, and it's getting more and more expensive. Average is around $7,000-8,000 in most areas. In the inner city, it's even more expensive, and in Washington D.C. itself, it can be up to $27,000 per year per pupil. It's just astronomical, the price of educating children in America. Of course, homeschoolers know that that price isn't realistic. It's overinflated because we educate at home, spending hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. So we see where is the money going? Well, it's going to the unions, it's going to corrupt governments, it's going to programs that are wicked and anti-Christian, and so we're seeing this big. As governments are usually the worst people to run anything. You usually get the worst product at the most expensive price, and that's exactly what we see in public schools. And it's amazing to me that Christians and conservatives, who are usually anti-government to some extent, they don't like to see big government, but so many of them, even in the Tea Party, it boggles my mind that they will still send their kids to public schools. But I think that's changing. I think our culture and the Christian church is now looking at this as one of the biggest issues, getting children out of the public schools.
Well, now we have a film clip here of a Christian public school teacher. Let's show that real quick.
Parents, they want to think that their teachers are doing good, but they don't know what really goes on inside of the classroom. And while the public school system teaches morals, we're told that that's the most important thing that we teach, that is the plate, that all of the subjects, everything else goes on. But what the public school system has done is taken Christ out from the morals, and so they've taken the foundation that the morals are based on away.
I asked Sarah about her struggle to be faithful to Christ in the public schools.
I can't tell the students about God. I can't give him glory for anything. Just the other night we had open house, we had parent night, and I have never felt so ashamed as a Christian as I did standing in front of those parents and presenting to them our plan, our school year, and I felt like I was making them feel good about their decision to place their child in the public school. I was reassuring them that they're in a good place when I don't believe that.
Surely there must be something she can do to help her students.
If I talk about my faith the way I want to, I know that I'll lose my job.
How long would your career last if you were to start teaching scripture from the front of the classroom?
I'd probably be out of here that day.
Now, you were talking earlier that some parents feel, well, my student has, and my child has a Christian teacher, so everything's going to be all right.
Yeah, people are very trusting of the public schools, but we know there's real deception going on. There's deception by the school itself, and there's even deception by teachers about what goes on in the classroom. You don't really know what goes on in the classroom. You're not going to hear it from your son or your daughter. They usually are not going to tell you the worst things and the horrendous things that happen. I know because I didn't tell my parents all the things that happened to me in public schools. But even the best teachers in the best schools, part of our film covers that issue, that even in the best schools you get guns and drugs and sexual assault and a whole host of things that you probably don't hear about. No public school advertises the number of assaults on their website. It's something that is generally hidden. But the big thing for me is I think a lot of Christians are self-deceived. They have to self-deceive to justify themselves sending their children to these public schools when there's a lot of evidence against them being an acceptable place for Christians to be. And the salt and light argument, the argument that we should send our children to be evangelists or we should be there as teachers to be evangelists, that's demolished in our film through testimony, through people like Sarah Laverdier, who talks about her experience and just talks about how difficult it is and near impossible it is to be a Christian teacher and to teach from a Christian perspective. In our film, we show examples of both teachers being punished for doing that and also students themselves being punished for evangelizing.
Now, one of my favorite clips is this one from the gentleman whose child was murdered at Columbine. And let's just show that real quick.
On the morning of April 20th, before noon, I received a phone call. And in a panic-stricken voice, Dan's mom said to me, "Ryan, have you heard from Dan? Do you know what's going on?" And I said no. And she told me that 2 gunmen had entered Columbine High School with machine guns and hand grenades, and they were killing kids. And so me and my coworker dropped what we were doing, and we headed towards the school. And we got to where we could look across a park and see the school, and there were 2 police cars there blocking our way, and we couldn't go any further. And we stood there watching, and a lady burst out her front door, and she was screaming and crying, and she said to the police, "Save that boy. Do something, save that boy." And that's really where I realized how bad things were.
Okay, that is, I've heard this gentleman speak and pray and things like that, and he's, hits the nail right on the head. And what would you say about that film clip?
It's a very powerful testimony that Brian Rohrbaugh has. He lost his son at Columbine. That's probably the biggest fear of any of us, is to lose a son, but to lose a son in that way, particularly so. And his testimony is very powerful because he says, I knew the public school problem. I knew that they didn't teach from a Christian perspective. They taught evolution, which devalues human life. And as a consequence, these young men at that school acted upon it and committed this terrible crime where they murdered other students at this school. The problem is that Columbine was a good school. Columbine was a great school. It's in a nice area, a nice suburb in Colorado, and you look at this, this great school, and even in the best schools, these things can happen. It still goes on daily. All of these issues, violent crime, is still common within the public schools. But Columbine, particularly Brian's testimony, is that he says, I'm accountable for what happens to my son, as much as these murderers obviously are accountable for killing his son. He was accountable for putting him there, and just anyone who's a listener who's putting their child in a public school, you're accountable for their safety there. You can't trust the government schools to look after your child. You can't pay someone enough to love your child. Really, that's what you want, I'm sure, for your children, is to have someone love them and take care of them. But really, you cannot trust anyone to do that other than yourself. It's really your job. That's how Scripture commissions you to do that task, to raise your children. And so the Columbine story is such a hard story, but his testimony is so strong and powerful that I believe it will convict a lot of people to take their children out of public schools.
Yeah, I remember him saying that a lot of people blame the National Rifle Association for the tragedy at Columbine, and that's sort of illogical, and I think it's
Well, the schools themselves have to take accountability for what happened at Columbine, and so you had these young men who were accepted with their violent actions, violent speech, violent writings. The police knew about it, the school knew about it, but it accepted it, just like it will accept. It has a pluralistic view of morality. It has relativistic morals. That's what your child will be learning, and not just in this case, potentially you can be a victim of those relativistic teachings on morality.
Well, I mean, the guy that did a lot of the shooting had an evolution T-shirt on.
That's correct. He believed in survival of the fittest and acted out on it.
One of the greatest scriptures in all the Bible that relates to education is Psalm 1. We don't think of it as an education scripture, but it says, "Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the ungodly." What kind of counsel are your children receiving in the government schools? Is it godly counsel? Is it based in the fear of the Lord? Is it proclaiming Jesus as Lord over all of creation, including math and science and history? No, of course not. The education they're getting in the government schools is ungodly counsel. The Scripture says you're blessed if you avoid that. And it says, "Blessed is the man who does not stand in the way of sinners." Well, when your children are in that environment, and they're walking the halls, and they're in the locker rooms, they're hearing about all the music and the movies of the world, and the sensuality and sin of the world, all the temptations that are there, that's the way of sinners. And we're instructed to avoid that. And then finally, do not sit in the seat of the scornful or the mocker. Children in these schools develop an attitude of resentment toward authority, towards parents, towards teachers, and that is something that we're told to avoid. So if we had nothing else in the Bible except the first couple verses of Psalm 1, I think it tells us definitively the government schools are out. They're not an option for Christians. But here's the antithesis of that. But it says, but his delight, the student's delight, is to be on the law of the Lord, and on that law he is to meditate both day and night. You can't have a student meditating on God's law both day and night if they're in a government school. It just can't happen.
Okay, there you have it. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's Israel Wayne, and that's a great clip of him talking about the philosophy of Christian education. And he quotes Psalm 1, and the Psalm 1 describes a righteous man, and there's particular qualities that he doesn't sit in the seat of the scornful. There's a separation between him and the unrighteousness around him, and that's what we're asked to do, or told to do by Scripture, is to keep ourselves unspotted from the world. And we can't do that when we submit our children to this system where they are indoctrinated. They're basically given the counsel of the wicked. They're under the training of those that deny Christ's relevancy in the classroom, and they continue to be indoctrinated. And that's why we're seeing so many young people walk away from the faith. They're getting a little bit of Bible, a little bit of Sunday school, and then they get a huge amount of humanistic education in the public schools. And so it's a very, very sad and very serious situation that we have in America right now as a result of it.
Okay, Colin, we're all out of time again. We certainly appreciate this tremendous presentation, and we want to encourage our viewers to tune again next week for the rest of the news.
Hi, I'm Michael. I love that scripture from Jeremiah where it says the plans that the Lord has for you, that He came to give you a future and a hope. That's why I believe we're not here by mistake. And I believe that every life is beautiful.